We come back. A new video of doomsday. Doomsday means once there is a world war and between the superpowers like America, China, India, Pakistan, France, and Russia, which is known as USSR. Between this, when the world war happens, so there is a must be exchange large amount of nuclear weapons. United Kingdoms, United States have so many nuclear weapons, and Russia have also so many nuclear weapons. China and India and Pakistan may also have also nuclear weapons. So what happens if the nuclear war each happened, and how the 20 minutes after the doomsday is happening, because the doomsday clock in these times is very closer to midnights. So let's look how the Scott readers, who is a former union inspector, explains us. So let's look, this clip is very interesting.
Now, do we have Scott Ritter? I hope we do, because there are so many questions the audience wants his take on. Scott Ritter, as always, an honour to interview you. Let's start with the one I just posed there. Was this a Suez moment in Washington yesterday? Did the British poodle ask its American master to allow it to do something in Ukraine, in Russia, that the American government said no to? Or is it all kabuki theater?
Well, it's not kabuki theater. This is actually, we came very close to all dying yesterday. I just want to drive this point home. Annie Jacobsen has written a book on nuclear war. It's a fiction book, but it's based upon interviews she's had with nuclear war planners. I've read the book. It's very accurate. 72 minutes is what it will take from start to finish to end of the world. 72 minutes. And we almost ended the world yesterday, because had Tony Blinken and the British defense minister gone to Kiev and do what they were planning on doing, which is giving a green light to the Ukrainian forces to use British and American-made long-range strike weapons against targets inside Russia. Had we done that, the Russians would have launched a retaliation that would have triggered a global ending nuclear war. This is a statement of fact. How do we know this? Because the Russians told us this. We had a trifecta of public statements made by the Russians, starting with Vladimir Putin, who said this will be an act of war. We had the Russian ambassador to the United Nations tell the Security Council in session that if this happens, it is a declaration of war. And then we had Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador, say on Friday, understand that our retaliation will not just be limited to Ukraine and NATO. We will hit the United States as well. This woke up the Biden administration. There was a back channel, too, that not too many people talk about. It's believed to be through the intelligence services. And the Russians were apparently very explicit as to what would be done. So explicit that the Biden administration pulled the plug on something it wanted to do. This wasn't just about the British, poodle trying to, pull a quick one. We were part of this too. We, together with the British and NATO, believed that Russia was bluffing, that Russia would never follow through, that this was just another red line that was going to be crossed. This time, the Russian response apparently woke up the Biden administration, especially the back channel response, which was very, very blunt and very explicit as to what would happen. I will say, if you live in London, you are very lucky today that the United States pulled the plug, because you wouldn't be here today. If you live in other places in Europe, if you live near Ramstein Air Base, if you live near Brussels, you are very fortunate today, because you'd be dead. And if you live in certain
very
areas,
very powerful, Scott. And I too have read Annie's book, and I'm trying very hard to interview her about it. It is completely devastating. No sane person could read it and then want to take the risk of a nuclear war. No sane person, even someone who sought to self-immolate, could not countenance, bear what would happen to everyone they have ever loved, everyone they have ever known, everyone they have ever seen or admired, being turned to a crisp within minutes. And how she describes the concentric circles of the blast and what happens after the blast and so on. Devastatingly powerful. And I agree with you entirely that that would have been the consequence if the British had prevailed. So what we had was a Suez moment when the Americans ordered the British and the French and the Israelis to stop their invasion of Egypt and theft of the Suez Canal. That's quite a big deal, Scott, especially when Blinken, on the inside, from everything that we could discern, was in favour of the British plan. Tell us how you think, in the corridors of the White House, this somehow was turned around.
Well, first of all, we have reason to believe that the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, was against this. And he had lead agency at the Ramstein. There was the 24th gathering of the let's give Ukraine as many weapons as possible to commit suicide meeting in Ramstein. And he met with Zelensky and others, and they thought at that point in time that Austin would give the green light. But Austin was operating on assessments prepared by the Pentagon that the Russians weren't bluffing, that their belief is that the Russians would do something in response. And so Austin hit pause. Blinken was furious about this. And so Blinken is now flying off to Kiev to embarrass Lloyd Austin. And he did embarrass Lloyd Austin. And that's when the Russians made their true sentiments known. And again, I believe this was done using back channel communications between the CIA and the SVR, the Russian intelligence service. And I also believe that it was done again in the Pentagon with the various channels of deconfliction that the Pentagon continues to maintain with their Russian counterparts. And the urgency and directness of the Russian statements are what caused the White House to put a pause on everything, because my understanding, this is an interpretation of public statements made by many Russian people. The Russian response would not be nuclear initially, but it would have been strategic. It would have used something they call the avant-garde hypersonic warhead that's delivered by strategic Russian systems. The avant-garde delivers a conventional strike that is the equivalent of a small nuclear bomb with extreme precision, and there's nothing that can shoot it down. And the Russians were explicit in the targeting of the avant-garde, what they would hit, and the certainty of the death and destruction of everything that would be within the radius here. And the Biden administration listened, understood, and pulled the plug. But here's the problem. We are politically committed to a policy for which there is no off-ramp right now. And we are in a political season where the candidate of choice of the White House, Kamala Harris, has committed to not just sustaining the Biden policy on Ukraine and Russia, but even taking a more hardline stance. And we have a Republican, Donald Trump, who, despite the insanity of many things he says on the issue of this, he said, we don't want a nuclear war. This is insane. And he's being advised by two people, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, who are also very sane on this issue. I know there's much we have to be opposed to, especially on Israel, but on this issue of nuclear war and the danger of nuclear war, they're advising. And so, it's very dangerous time, because I think the Trump a future Trump administration could be seen as looking for an off-ramp. And And now the question, does Kamala Harris adjust to that and come up with a better off ramp, contradicting Biden policy, or does she double down on stupid? We are in the silly season of American presidential politics where anything is possible. And the British haven't given up. They're going to be working very hard in the wings of the General Assembly to put pressure on Biden because they believe that Russia is bluffing. They believe that Putin would not pull the trigger. They believe that they can get away with this. They believe that this would cause Russia to back down. How long can the Biden administration toe the line on this in a presidential election season where perceptions of being weak towards Russia could be fatal at the election polls?
Wow. Our friend, your friend and mine, Colonel McGregor, he always signs off his pronunciamento. Make peace, you fools. Why don't they? Why is it because the making peace will now be too expensive and will effectively be existentially fatal for the Ukrainian regime? That Russia's gone so far that it will not end the war without such profound changes in Ukraine that the West simply can't accept it.
Well, it's interesting because there's two windows of opportunity for peace if we survive. The first window is pre-winter, between now and winter. This is where Ukraine would get the best possible deal. But Ukraine politically is not prepared to accept such a deal because there's still a modicum of life left in there. At least it can pretend that, we're in Kursk, flexing our muscles, we're holding the Russians back in the Donbass, and we're threatening Russia with these deep strikes. We're still relevant. Then the winter is going to come, and the winter will be devastating for Ukraine. It will absolutely destroy Ukraine, gut Ukraine. It's going to be very difficult on Europe as well. So the next window that opens up is in the spring. In this one, Ukraine will have no negotiating platform. It will be a fundamentally defeated nation. And that could even be a more dangerous situation for the West, as you said, who've committed so much capital into Ukraine. So if it weren't for the lunacy of the American political environment, this silly season of presidential elections, I actually think the United States could pull off a peace negotiation now because it's the best deal NATO, Europe, and Ukraine will ever get. But if you wait until the spring, the defeat will be manifest. Plus, we're seeing the gradual collapse of Europe as we speak. We don't know how long the British government is going to survive. Starmer has to confront some very serious budgetary issues that could lead to, his potential political demise. The idea that all of these actors now who are pushing for a conflict will be around come spring is lunacy. We know in America it will be a completely different administration, no matter what. What we do know, the one consistency here is that Russia does want peace, that Russia is not a rabid dog looking for violence sake. And if a equitable opportunity is provided that respects Russia's legitimate national security interests, respects what Russia has accomplished to date in this conflict, we could have peace tomorrow.
Now, let's pivot in the time available. The old Houthis, as they like to call them, the Yemenis, men in sandals with daggers in their belts, pulled something off today in their strike on Tel Aviv that is being, even the most sensational reports of it, are severely underestimating its significance, aren't they? Because if these sandal-wearing tribesmen in the Yemen were able to achieve this, then someone like Iran would be able to achieve very much more. How did they pull that off, Scott?
Well, according to the news reports, and according to the announcements made by Ansarallah, the Houthi, they fired a hypersonic missile of their own design, of their own manufacture. I believe that they probably got some assistance from Iran on this, but that's between Iran and Ansarallah. But it doesn't matter. Ansarallah has a hypersonic missile. They advertised it a couple months ago, and everybody gave short shrift to these sandal-wearing, men who run around in dresses, with their funny little curved daggers, and we mock them and we call them vile names, and they just hit Tel Aviv with a hypersonic missile that couldn't be shot down. And I think everybody needs to understand what happened here. The route that this missile took it through concentric circles of ballistic missile defense, not just of Israel, but of the United States, Great Britain, France, Saudi Arabia. It defeated them all. It came into Israel, penetrated the most heavily guarded part of Israel, downtown Tel Aviv, and struck it. One missile. There were no decoys. There were no, trickery. One missile, straight up, mano a mano, penetrated all of the defense, sending a signal to Israel that if Iran were to fire 500 of these missiles, there would be 500 impacts where Iran wanted them to impact, sending a signal that if Hezbollah were to fire 500 of these missiles, there would be 500 impacts. Israel, the United States, and everybody has to wake up today understanding there is no defense. Israel is a defenseless state when it comes to this modern hypersonic technology. And we don't know how many missiles Ansarallah has. Israel's promising, Netanyahu's out there flexing his muscles. We're going to strike them, make them pay. I don't know about that, Netanyahu, because if they have one, I would imagine they have another and another and another.
You can be sure. You can be sure of that. Let me ask you, because I have your considerable expertise at my table right now. I was reading a very long piece by a very fine military analyst that I follow, Big Serge. It was about the birth of naval warfare, which effectively began what we could recognize as naval warfare in modern times, effectively began in a battle between the Portuguese Navy off the coast of India against the Arab navies of the time. And the European prevailed. And then the British defeated the Spanish and the Armada and so on. It was a very fine piece of writing. But I got to thinking, as I looked at how naval warfare had developed and all the investments we have in naval ships and assets, these things are only floating coffins nowadays, aren't they, Scott? This is the age of the rocket. This is the age of the missile. Tanks and aircraft carriers are museum pieces. Am I right?
Well, especially aircraft carriers. Look, in a low intensity environment, an aircraft carrier could have utility. We've seen that off the shores of Iraq, where we were bombing villages, farmers, wedding parties. We saw that in Afghanistan, where we did similar devastating attacks on civilian infrastructure. But nowadays, with the advent of precision strike ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, it makes no sense to pour all this money into a carrier battle group. The bottom line is, in the next war against peer level forces, you're British, so you know this. If I said the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. The two British ships that the British Navy sailed off to defeat the Japanese. And they got out there, and unfortunately for the British, there was something called the airplane. And the airplane sank both ships. Today, these were the pride of the British fleet. Today, aircraft carriers will be sunk by these precision strike missiles, these hypersonic missiles for which there is no defense. They have destroyers and cruisers that are designed to shoot down incoming threats. They won't. And we can even take it a step further. For instance, the Russians with these avant-garde systems, the same ones that would devastate London, one avant-garde would literally split an aircraft carrier in half, just through the dynamic physical impact of it would split a carrier in half, sink it instantly. And there is no defense to this. the carrier battle group is antiquated. It's no longer viable in modern warfare. This is the reality of ballistic missile technology. So any nation, especially the United States, that has built its strategic presence on above surface fleets, understand that the day of your dominance is finished. That when the time will come when your fleet will be sunk. And that's a tragedy for all the men and women that are on those ships, but it's the same fate befell the Spanish sailors in the Armada when they went up against with Drake and the British fleet.
Finally, Scott, and it's a kind of reprise to the very powerful introduction that you made. I hear people talking about conscription. We're going to be sent to the front. I don't know how long it takes to go by train from London to Kiev, but I know the war will be over before they get there. This antiquated thinking that this war is going to be about us, not the sons of the powerful, of course, but the poor Jack Tar and the poor Tommy are going to somehow entrain and head for, I don't know, Lithuania or Latvia, and are going to fight with a tin hat on in a trench against the Russian. This is not what's going to happen. What's going to happen, if it happens, is going to be over in moments, in hours, and in maximum in a few days, longer than it will take you to pick up your ration kit.
Yeah, first of all, let's just assume that there could be a war that could be fought between NATO and Russia that didn't go nuclear. If you're going into this combat with a conscript army, you're going to die. I'm just here to say that modern war is so complex. The tactics are so difficult. The level of physical fitness is so huge. The level of professional acuity, the weapon systems are so complex that if you're not a professional warrior who has made waging war your business for years, waking up every day dedicated solely to this task, if you're a conscript, you're going to die, and you're going to die very quickly. And even if you're a professional soldier, you're going to die. It's going to be an extraordinarily expensive, bloody war. People have no idea what the reality of the violence that's taking place today in Ukraine. We hear the numbers, but nobody equates the numbers, and the sense of futility and fatality that exists amongst even the most highly trained soldiers, who know that if things are working their way, they win the battle very easily. But if things go off just a little bit, they die very quickly, and there's nothing they can do about it. The drone will kill you. The artillery piece will kill you. The missile will kill you. Your failure to suppress the enemy means your instant death on both sides. This is the reality. But the real reality is that if our two sides do engage, the moment one side achieves a battlefield superiority, the world ends, because we will go nuclear. One side or the other will go nuclear, because it's an existential point. When you commit all your resources into this battle and you've lost, you're not going to surrender. You're going to fire what you have left. Under the premise that you will escalate to de-escalate, you will intimidate the enemy, but the enemy, whether it's us or them, will not yield to that, because they've already factored in, if you hit us, we hit you with everything, in a vain hope that by doing so, we take out more of you that can hit, but we can't, so they strike back. 72 minutes later, the world is over. I don't know how, as you said, I don't know how long it takes to go through the channel from Great Britain to France, but I would imagine that 72 minutes is about right to get to Paris or in that area on a high-speed train. You won't make it to Paris. You won't make it to Paris. You'll be dead. That's how quick this is going to happen.
Scott Ritter, unbelievably powerful. Thank you for that extraordinary interview.